it's really inspiring when we got the call about this and to see so many people interested in it and looking to take action in this space. So I suppose like broadly, my PhD looks at masculinities, identities and well-being among rural men in Ireland, with a particular focus on the farming community and how that shapes their relationship with health and particularly help-seeking behaviour. But I suppose outside of academia, I'm also a man who was once a boy and quite an insecure teenager trying to navigate myself through life against the backdrop of what a man should be in society. And I think all males who are probably on this call can probably resonate with that experience to some extent, and females as well, as was very eloquently related in Maya's poem. They have their own gendered expectations and social pressures to conform to in society. Also, I'm one of 4 brothers. I have no sisters. I went to an all-boys school. I spent a huge portion of my time in sporting environments where there was constant kind of man-on-man competition. So I get it. And I don't not just academically, but from the male point of view, from inside that environment, and the pressure to be man and to be a provider and to be in control and to be one of the lads. And I suppose what I want to kind of touch on here is the type of bubble that men can operate in and the social pressure to conform to this bubble and the norms associated with that bubble that positions females and also less masculine men as disadvantaged. And I suppose I'm conscious of my own privileged position as a man in this overall conversation about male violence against women. And I suppose the 2 things that I would really like to get across is, I suppose, the cultural context that shapes violence towards women, and why also there are such high rates of self-harm and suicide among men, and why these 2 things are relatively rooted in the same space. And when I say like the cultural context, I suppose I mean the unwritten rules of society that nobody really talks about, but we all kind of know that are there. And I don't want to, when I talk about men in that and their high rates of suicide, I don't want that to sound like I'm turning the spotlight away from women. But the point that I want to make is that in this kind of hyper masculine society that we all occupy, and as we've already alluded to, disadvantages females, but it also disadvantages males in society, and not just males, also the natural environment that we all inhabit is at the mercy of a hyper masculine society. So control over nature by man is rooted in the same space as control over women and less masculine men. So, and for instance, just to give a bit of context to that, for men and why men are disadvantaged by this type of society. So men have overwhelmingly higher rates of suicide than females in Ireland. And interestingly, females present with mental health concerns and depression at much higher rates than males, but yet males take their own life from suicide far more frequently than females do. And what that would suggest is that there's a huge problem in emotional expression and help-seeking behaviour among men in Ireland. And you're probably thinking to yourself, maybe, what is that to do with male violence against women? And this is why this conversation is particularly relevant in the context of gender-entrenched environments, where there are strict ways of how a male should act and how a female should act. And in such environments, if men fail to meet certain ideals of being a man in society in terms of being in control, being powerful and being the breadwinner, and if they fail to kind of meet them ideals, that can be very emasculating for men. And men can often use aggression and violence to try and recapture this masculine sense of superiority when they feel their masculinity is being threatened. So they can ultimately resort to their most primal masculine advantage in terms of strength and intimidation. And it's important that in the context of violence and that no mistakes should be made about it, that violence and aggression from men is never just a moment of madness or alcohol related. It is a strictly negotiated behavior that's rationalized against a man's masculine identity, that they will use violence or aggression to regain control in a particular environment. And alcohol or moments of madness can be used as a means to try and minimize their own responsibility or men's responsibility for their own actions. And I think that's an important point in the overall conversation, because there's plenty of men who engage in alcohol and get drunk and would never perpetrate violence towards females. And the other side of that coin is that when men feel emasculate, they can also act inwards as a means of despair due to this masculine sense of failure, and that in many cases can manifest itself in men self-harming and also at the most extreme levels engage in suicide. And while there is no single reason for why a man would act in such ways, we cannot overlook the cultural constructions of performing man or performing masculinities in society that promotes the suppression of emotions and aggressions as a means of dealing with things that they're finding difficult. And the point that I said there, the performance of man or the performance of masculinities. And in that context, these are learned behaviors of how we should do man in society. And I will give you a little, maybe practical example of that. And one that kind of we all might come across in little ways in different environments that we might not take advantage of in regards to how young boys and men in particular learn that emotional expression, is not for them. So, and I think about this often, but I was at a sports game. It was last summer, and I think it was an underage game, and I think they were under 10s. And at that age, the boys and girls play together. But there was one particular boy, and he was a really good sports player, and he was one of these kids that's up and down the pitch, and he was on the ball constantly. But he went down injured in the first half. And the ref was going over to him to see was he okay. And as that was going on, the manager ran in. I think the manager could have been his dad. And he goes over to him and he quite aggressively says to him, "Are you crying? Are you crying? Don't you be crying now. Get up there and get back on with the game." And I could hear him saying this. And then I was watching the boy go on and get back up and get back into the play. And I could see him wiping away his tears, wiping them away as if they were like tears of shame or something. And then interestingly, so the game went on. And then interestingly, in the second half, a girl went down injured and the game stopped. And everyone went over, not everyone went over, but a few people went over and they showed care and compassion. And there was a space for tears. And then once we realized she was okay, the game recommenced. Now, I know you can probably kind of grasp what I'm getting at here, but the message that sends to that boy and that girl in question, not just that boy and that girl in question, but everyone in that environment, shows that, emotional expression is for girls and it's not for boys. And if men want to stake a claim in these masculine-centered environments, they need to take these things on the chin and not show emotional expression. And what is ultimately going on in that space is the process of social reproduction, when in that instance, a man is projecting onto a child how he learned to be a man in society, and he's demanding that from that child in question. And you might say to yourself, maybe, well, that's just sport and that's just the way it is. But I don't agree. And I don't agree that sport has to be like that. And I do think that there comes a line, and sometimes we can cross that line in society of what we expect of our young boys. And that expectation evolves as boys get older and is largely rooted in some form of performance, not just performance on the sports pitch or in work, but other performances that can go along with kind of lad culture in male-dominated environments. Like, you might see performances in the pub where, there's competition to see who could be the best drinker, or performances in relation to how men relate to girls. Like, a common thing would be a man going into his lad group and he might glorify his sexual exploits that he had with a particular girl. And you quickly learn in them environments that there are certain parameters that elevate some men and marginalize other men. And in these environments, men will seek things out to climb up the kind of hierarchy lad culture chain. And what I gave that example about that boy, that's just one example that's very prevalent in male dominated sporting environments. And there are many other environments where similar things like that go on. But the point is that many men merely operate in these kind of performance bubbles that is played out in a type of, kind of coliseum of manhood where all the other men are judging you. And you feel pressure to live up to these environments. And, as I think about that little boy who went down, I also see myself through that little boy, because I was a lad who came through an environment like that, and a particular pathway of how you grow to be a man, and the little things that you learn. And, I was a little young boy who wanted to go up and be a sports star, and I quickly learned that there were certain things that I had to do in order to conform to that environment and to survive in that type of male dominated environment. But fortunately for me, and I have some very good people in my life, or some very good people who have came into my life at different stages, and that I've been able to express myself emotionally. And those kind of experiences haven't really had as much of a hold as they could have had on me. But I'm also very conscious that many young men don't have spaces like that to talk about their emotions and their masculine behavior. And I think about that young boy that went to the ground that day. And I think about all boys. And I hope at some stage in the future that they will have supports to help shape a healthier cultural environment. And when a young boy goes down crying in the future, that there will be space for them to receive care and compassion that he does deserve. And like life, we won't get on with the game until boys are okay and they have spaces to express themselves emotionally. And I think that can only help in the whole context of gender-based violence, because violence that's perpetrated towards women is rooted much more deeply in emotional suppression among men, and it presents itself in that space. So I think ultimately, that we really need to wake up to the societal tap that is constantly dripping. And often we fail to kind of pay attention to these kind of little nuanced things that are going on in society until something major happens or society gets punched in the face, and that, another woman is a victim of gender-based violence, or we lose another man to suicide, in this overall battle of manhood. And we need to really start paying attention to the small little things, the small little daggers that society has given us the whole time that lead to these kind of, very unfortunate outcomes. And I really believe that if we can create more spaces, particularly within our institutions that dominate Irish society, where men can engage safely in emotional expression and address some of their masculine behaviors, that we'll all be, the better for that. And I'm just reminded of a quote that I read recently by Desmond Tutu, who passed away. And he had a saying that, there comes a time in society when we need to stop pulling people out of the river and go back upstream and see why they're falling in. And I think in the space that we're in now at the minute, I think that's so apt about what we need to do. We need to go back upstream and see what's going on and see, can we help shape men to create a healthier environment for everyone.